In a previous lecture, we saw how the this keyword behaves itself when it's part of a function constructor. That is, it's referring to the function itself or the object itself when that function is invoked together with the new keyword. In this lecture, we'd like to look at object literal and how the this keyword behaves itself inside of one. So I'm looking at script.js and I'm located in the lecture 49 folder. So let me go ahead and close the browser and let's create an object literal. Let's call it literal circle since we've done circles before. And an object literal is just two curly braces, and don't forget the semicolon at the end. And we'll give it a radius of 10. Okay, so an object literal with a radius of 10, and we'll put a comma and we'll give it a get area. And get area is going to be a function. Its value of this property is going to be a function. We don't need the name, we already have get area. And we're not going to give it the argument either. What we're going to do is we're going to do console.log and we'll console.log this right inside the get area method. So let's go ahead and save that. And once we created that object literal, let's go ahead and call the get area function and see what happens when we do console.log this. We obviously have not really yet, at least, calculated the area. So let's go ahead and save that. And we'll see that what's going on here is that this is no longer referring to the window object, to the global object, but it's actually referring to our circle class or to our literal circle, which is an object with a radius of 10. If we open it up, we'll see that it has a get area property and a radius of 10. So when an object literal gets created, this, instead of pointing to the global object, is actually pointing to the actual object that got created. Therefore, what we could do is we can do return math.py times math.power, and we could say this dot radius to the second power. So this is referring to the literal circle object, and it has a property called radius, which is right here. So therefore, this is perfectly legal and it should work just fine. So let's go ahead and actually console.log the answer to our get area execution. And when we execute that, we do get 314 and so on. So this actually worked just fine. Now, why is that? Why is it that this is working? Why is this keyword referring to the object instead of referring to, like any other regular function, to the global object like a window? Well, believe it or not, you already know the reason to this. And the reason you know this is because when we discussed object literals, I told you that this statement right here, when you open the curly braces, is really tantamount to what? New object. So when that happens, this is actually what's executed in the background, new object. Well, you see that new keyword again. And when we see the new keyword, this variable inside of that object is now referring to the actual object and not to the outside window or outside global object. So this in fact works exactly like function constructors in terms of the new keyword, right? Even though the new keyword here is kind of implicit, well, everything's here implicit since this is an object literal. Now there is a bug, or at least what most people consider is a bug within the JavaScript implementation. In every single browser, it's really within the JavaScript specification. And the bug comes out in this fashion. If inside getArea, I will go ahead and create another function, just like I can, and I'll say var increase radius. And it's going to be a function, and I don't need a name again, and I don't really need an argument here either. And inside the body of the function, I am going to go ahead and increase the radius to 20. So I'll say this dot radius equals 20. So now when this method executes right here, or this line executes right here, this dot radius should now be 20. So it shouldn't be 314. It should be a much larger area of the circle. So let's go ahead and actually invoke, we just defined this function here. Don't forget the semicolons because that's an expression. Let's go ahead and invoke this function right here. So now after this invocation, this dot radius should be 20, and this whole line should execute with the value of this dot radius equals 20. So let's go ahead and save that. And what do you know? It's still 314. That's kind of strange. Well, let's go ahead and console.log what our radius is. This dot radius. what exactly is our radius before we execute this, but after we increased the radius. Let's go ahead and save that, and it's still 10. Now, where did this 20 go? Well, the way this works is that when you have an inner function within another function, this keyword starts pointing to the global object. And we can actually test this by saying window.radius, and this should say 20, and so it does. So this 20 actually got set on the global object instead of on our literal circle object. So how do you get around this? Well, there's a common pattern that people use to get around this. And the way you get around this is you just say var self equals this. So now that you have self, self is always going to be referring to this, and this, at this point at least, is referring to the literal circle object. So instead of in the inner functions referring to this, you always refer to self. So now radius is equal 20, and now this should update the radius inside the object literal, inside our literal circle. So when we execute this line right here, this dot radius should be equal to 20, not 10. Let's go ahead and execute this. And as you can see, now our radius is indeed 20, and the area is much larger. So this is the way you get around this kind of an annoying JavaScript bug, and I guess there is a disagreement out there whether or not that this is a bug or this is intended and this is how it's supposed to work. Either way, it's not really very useful, and in fact, in the new JavaScript version, which is ECMAScript 6, this supposedly has been fixed.